you feel like there's a certain milestone that you'd like to cover, we can certainly do that. But we've kind of gone through your autobiography, and we thought we would try to look back over your life and see what you've learned.
See what?
See what you've learned.
You got 20 hours of film?
Well, yes, actually we do. And we're just going to take it step by step. I was thinking about starting with your accident and your first experience with the golden world.
That's when my life began, really.
Well, that's what I was thinking. Would you like to maybe tell us about that time, what happened, and how that led to the golden world and what it was like?
Okay. It's the most important thing that ever happened to me. My mother and my father had separated company, marriage, and they lived about maybe 2 miles apart. I visited back and forth. They made that easy for me. Nobody fussed about where I was or the visiting that I did. But it was a day in August, hot, and I had been visiting my father, was on roller skates, started back toward my family home, and just about halfway between the two, that seemed symbolic to me later, I skated into a drugstore to have a Coca-Cola or something. There were 5 cents in those days, and I had 5 pennies in my hand, I remember. I was opening the door of the drugstore with 5 pennies in my hand. And I didn't hear it, I didn't see it, but 2 cars crashed in the intersection. And one of them went out of control, jumped the curb, mashed me up against the brick wall of the doorway of the drugstore. I remember when I woke up from it, I was lying on the sidewalk with a circle of people around me, still with 5 pennies in my hands. I remember distinctly, I can't hang on to this anymore. Drop the pennies. The impact of the car had caught my knee just between the bumper of the car and the brick wall. I've gone back many a time to that brick wall and observed the brick half chipped out or half broken. Last time I went there, the front had been redesigned. The wall was still there, but it had been coated over with something, and I couldn't find the brick. So I didn't go back there anymore. Somebody nearby had heard the crash, somebody who was a nurse, came out, put a tourniquet on my leg, which is all that saved my life, because the main artery in back of my knee had been broken. I was rapidly bleeding to death. She got a tourniquet on my leg. The ambulance came. I gave a telephone number for my house. I remember the ambulance ride. I remember a bump at the entrance to the hospital, and that hurt. I've always been concerned with that half-inch bump. Thought if I ever got wealthy, I would redo the door frame there. I never did. They put me through surgery. This was late afternoon. About midnight, the artery, which had been sutured together during the surgery, broke loose, and I was hemorrhaging badly again. But it was inside a plaster cast by now, and no one found it for some time. My mother, who was very good at such things, had hired a private nurse for me, pretty rare in those days. She discovered the blood leaking through the cast and gave off the alarm. They whisked me off to the surgery and blood transfusions and quick emergency measures. But my experience in the midst of that was that I had what's often termed near-death experience. I remember my strength fading away and resisting this, setting my feet like a mule, so to speak, trying to hang on to my consciousness. And finally I couldn't anymore. My strength had departed. I flipped over some kind of border. People with experience like this often speak of such an episode at some point where one's in another land, so to speak. This language is not adequate, but it's all that one can conjure up for it. I was in a paradise-like state, bright light and much, much happiness, an ecstatic state. Apparently just about that moment they got me to the surgery and were giving me blood transfusions in both arms. And I was, so to speak, dragged back over what I'd called the bump. And I resisted coming back just as much as I had resisted going over it in the first place. But I was dragged back, as they say. Woke up in the surgery, bright lights and things hurting, and much regretting having lost the promised land, so to speak, that I had experienced. I've never forgotten that ecstatic experience. I've clung to it all of my life, viewing it different times in my life as I gain more maturity. But it's always the heavenly experience. I think that's the biggest experience, most profound experience of all of my life. I've been trying to get back to that world since age 11. That has enlightened or impeded my life ever since, and it's both. Everything I know comes from that level or that experience. But that overshadows and makes the ordinary things, the everyday process of growing up and getting hold and putting your feet on the ground, has been extra hard for me. I've jokingly said along the way that I haven't incarnated properly into the three-dimensional world. That's appraisal from my adult years. It's always been hard for me to get my energy focused on so-called practical things.
I'm wondering, it seemed to me that that teaches you about the value, that started you off with the value of the inner world.
That's true. I got launched into the inner world much, much too early. And I've had to make my way out of the inner world, perhaps from age 20 onward, by discipline or by great effort. Most people are out of their natural, infantile, inner world earlier than that. But for me, my inner world got reinforced. I didn't naturally drift out of it. 11 is just about the time when ready to give up childhood and go off and explore the world. And I went burrowing back into it at that time. So that's everything that's good about me and it's everything that's bad about me.
But in a sense, it kind of set up the rest of your life.
Yes. I very nearly didn't regain adulthood or this world, so to speak. I don't like that language, but I don't know any other. It was only when I began work with Fritz Kunkel at age, whatever it was, 26 or thereabouts, that I finally found out consciously what the issues were and could make a decision. Yes, I want to live. I want to live in this world. If I'm going to have friends and love people, which is the biggest issue in my life, I have to be here and I have to obey the laws of the world and have a body and strength and masculinity and all the accompanying things in order to do it. And that was a big decision. I never spoke about this with Fritz Kunkel, but that was the issue which was evolving. And he did it just right. It was a language that he was conversant with. He's not the first person, but he's one of several along the way who saved my life for me.
Do you think that experience of your accident and the value that you found in it, do you think that has an intrinsic lesson for others that would be, or what could someone else take away from that experience?
It requires difficult language, and the experience is maybe as good language as any. One has to make an interplay of this world and the next world, or the heavenly world, to be a valid or effective human being. And that's how it happened to me. It happens other ways to people and other times in life. Mine was a dangerous way of doing it because it's only too easy to miss it that way. Christianity is explicit in this. If you get me off on Christian doctrine, I never stop talking. Christianity, if one looks at it as a portrayal of the prototype for a person to follow in his human life, puts forth as the hero or the guide the figure of Christ, who they explicitly define as half human and half divine, which is slightly different language for talking about the laws of this world and the laws of the heavenly world or the next world. And I got introduced to that very early. That's not particularly useful to anybody, but perhaps to somebody who's had an experience like that. But that's been the dynamics of my life, certainly from that point on. I felt pulled by heaven and earth, and very nearly ended up with neither. But when the collision or the conflict got so severe I couldn't stand it anymore, with the aid of Fritz Kunkel, I saw what the issues were, and I chose to live. I chose to live this life for the express purpose or reason that I wanted to be among the people I loved. The rest of it you can have.
But in choosing to live, when you decided that with working with Fritz Kunkel, you also decided to attempt to keep in balance the heavenly part of yourself.
Well, there was no way I could refuse the heavenly. That was the larger of the two elements. And that's been so all of my life. But even to keep a hold on an ecstatic vision, you have to have a body and all the things that go along with that in order to experience it. That's my answer if somebody starts misquoting Hindu scriptures and, well, you have to kill the ego. No, you don't kill the ego, you put the balance back where it belongs. If the ego is too big, if you killed it out, you'd be either dead or psychotic. There has to be an ego. There has to be an I entity. As, so to speak, a pair of eyes and ears or an organ for experiencing the ecstatic experience. I had no language for this. I didn't know what was going on, but this was the essence of it. It's the essence of everybody.